All right, gents, welcome to another podcast. So I'm not going to be making myself too many friends on this one, I think. I'm doing the World School Top 20 rankings. And look, even if you do the rankings in your own country, it's somewhat controversial and you get a lot of arguments. So do a World Top 20. I know I'm looking for big issues over here, but I'm just going to go ahead and do with it anyway. Now, I haven't included any Australian schools, and you won't see many UK schools outside of England. And the reason for that is, number one, the results are hard to find, and number two, the results that I did find didn't really impress me that much, to be honest with you guys. So overall, I think this is a fair assessment of a World Top 20, my opinion. And if any of my followers can sort of give me an idea of where I can find Australian schoolboy scores and Irish schoolboy scores, for example, that would be a great help to me for next year. Anyway, let's get right into it, guys. Number 20, we have Christchurch boys. As you can see, 20 games played, 15 wins, 5 losses, with an average score of 36-21. So obviously they had a difficult time of it at the beginning, losing to Grey and PAARL boys. And then they had a great run in their local league before being stopped by Rangiora High in a massive upset, 33-35. And they actually avenged that, 54-22. And then they made it to the playoffs, where they drew with Christ's College, but they went through on account of having a superior head-to-head or more tries scored. I can't quite remember. Then they basically played against the Otago boys, 26-23 win over there to enter the top 4. And once they're in the top 4, they were very well beaten by Napier boys and Hamilton boys both. So number 19, we have AFFIES, 13 games, 8 wins, 5 losses, average score of 29-22. Now this is a very, very controversial inclusion. I do realize that. But if you take a look at the quality of opponent AFFIES have played, I mean, every single one of the schools they've lost to are included in this top 20, right? And also you can see they had a close game against Grey and a close game against Glenwood, who were the number 1 and number 3 ranked school in South Africa this year. And they beat LANDBOU very convincingly, 38-14. So look, their match record isn't fantastic. I mean, 8 wins and 5 losses is nothing great. But if you take a look at who the quality of opposition they've played, I definitely think they deserve their place on this ranking. So then to number 18, we move to BLACKROCK College in Ireland. I could only find 4 of their games in the Leinster Schools Cup series. But yeah, so in terms of that, played 4, won 4, 36-16 average score. As you can see, basically they were pretty dominant except for a close game against St. Gerard's, and they beat Belvedere College 35-12 to win the Leinster Schools Trophy, which is by far the most competitive league in Ireland. Then to 17, we got Napier boys, 9 wins and 6 losses, average score of 30-22. You can see at the beginning, I mean, they had a dreadful tour to South Africa. I mean, they got shell-shocked by Bull and LANDBOU. The Monument score really did flatter them, guys. If you watch the whole game, that's a very flattering score. I mean, Monument were far better. I've had a lot of comments about cheating from the ref and awarding tries and all the rest of it. But the one thing with Monument, which I'll get to later, is they were very inconsistent this year. But when they played well, they played well. And in this game, they played pretty well. But they have a habit of trailing off towards the end, which makes a lot of their games seem a lot tighter than they really are. Then they had a loss to Rondebosch, 28-31. And the whole thing you could be thinking to yourself is, how can I include a school in the top 20 in the world when they lost to a school that's not even in the top 20 in South Africa? Well, look at their domestic results, right? They play in the Super 8, which is probably the second toughest league in New Zealand. And you could see they had a very tight game against Hamilton boys. They beat Christchurch boys very, very handsomely. They beat Hastings very handsomely as well twice. And they just lost the final to St. Peter's. Now, in that final, I think they were like 28-12 up, and then they lost in the last like 20 minutes, I think it was. So although they had a tough tour to South Africa, I think they learned a lot. And watching these guys play, I still rate them as a team. I really like their forwards. I mean, I think it was their hooker and their flank. Their forward pack, just fantastic. And Boyle and LANDBOU, 26-59, that's a thrashing. But LANDBOU, when they turn it on, they turn it on. They can beat anyone. And I'll get to that point a bit later. So, yeah, I think they deserve their place in the World Top 20. Then we move on to Monument. Now, yeah, Monument had a long season there. So they had 16 wins, 1 draw, 7 losses, an average score of 40-25. Now, if you take a look at their losses, the only sort of losses that you could call like solid losses, for want of a better word, are basically against PAARL Gym and Grey College, which are 2 of the best schools in the country. The rest of the matches that they sort of lost, they basically got their revenge, so to speak. Whoever they lost to besides those schools, they beat them at a later stage. Except for Transvalia. Now, Transvalia were someone I wanted to consider to put into this top 20, but some of their results were just too inconsistent. So, I think this Monument team this year was fantastic. I don't know if it's a coaching, I don't know if it's psychological, but on paper this team was fantastic this year, and they just didn't perform. I mean, the Glenwood game, they were well beaten, but Glenwood was number 3 in the country this year, guys. So it was a strong Monument team, and everyone expected them to do far better, but they didn't, and that's what it is at the end of the day. In 15th place, we have Ratu Kadavulevu School from Fiji. Good luck pronouncing that. I think they're just known as RKS normally. So anyway, 9 matches played, 9 matches won, 38-6 average score. So it's very hard to find results on them, but these are the results that I found. You can see they beat Hastings Boys very badly, 35-5. They won the Sanex Festival very comfortably. They did have a close game against Framsby. Now, Framsby aren't in our top 20 in South Africa. I think they would probably just be 25-30 in the country this year. So they actually had a pretty tight game against them, but the rest of it was absolutely dominant, and they won the Sanex Championship this year. So if we move on to number 14, we have OAKDALE LANDBOU. 13 wins and 3 losses with an average score of 42-20. And they had a great season. I mean, they had a tight game against PAARL Gym. They were well beaten by ROOS, who were an absolute fire at that stage of the year. And then, like I said to you earlier, this is a shock result. Boyle and LANDBOU losing 1956, the last game of the season. They would have been ranked higher on this, definitely, if they didn't lose that last game by such a wide margin. But look, like I said, Boyle and LANDBOU can absolutely decimate any team outside of the top 5 on any given day. And then 13, we have HARROW from England. Unbeaten season, 100% record, 10 games played, 10 games won, 37-9 average score. We can take a look at their results. You can see a good victory over Dulwich. Absolutely thrashed Eton. Wellington School, which is a top rugby school there, 21-13. Now, they beat the Warwick School 26-19, and the Warwick School were the Daily Mail champions for that year. Now, just remember one thing, guys, as well. With the UK schools, I'm going on the 2017/2018 season. Their seasons work a bit differently to ours. Then on to 12th place, PAARL Boys. Not a great season by their standard, but over the last couple of years they've been absolutely dominant. So they needed a bit of a break, let's say. It was going to come anyway. Now on paper, this team had huge expectations surrounding them. I mean, that forward pack was absolutely beast. But I think their backline let them down a lot this year. So we got 10 wins and 4 losses, which is an average score of 26-20. You can take a look at their results. Now, in terms of their losses, you take a look. I mean, ROOS absolutely murdered them. But ROOS were on fire at this stage of the year. They had a pretty close game against Grey, relatively speaking. I think there was a lot of psychology at play there. It was played at PAARL Boys, and Grey had... I think they'd lost 3 in a row to PAARL Boys, so I think they were very careful in this game. The other loss being to Jaguars from Argentina, 10 points to 19. Now, that team was Argentina under 18. That was the national Argentinian under 18 team. And then Oakdale, 29-47 loss. And the big one was a 24-21 win over PAARL Gym. Now, the PAARL Derby is the world's biggest school derby. And I don't think many people expected PAARL boys to pull it off, but they did. And in a derby game, anything can happen. Then we move on to number 11, which is Sacred Heart. 9 games won, 1 draw, 2 losses, average score of 36-13. So we just take a look at their results. Well beaten by St. Kitts, and they drew with King's College and then lost to King's College, but these guys are playing in like quite by far the toughest school league in New Zealand. So that's why they're quite high up on the list if you take a look at it. I mean, they beat St. Peter's 26-23, and St. Peter's ended up as champions of New Zealand. Now let's move into the top 10, guys. So 10th place we have Selborne, 15 wins and 3 losses, average score 43-16. Now, you'll see that they had losses to Rugby and DHS, but one thing must be remembered, that you've got to put these losses into context. So Selborne's 2 key players, it was the hooker and the lock, accepted a scholarship to go study at Grey College in Bloemfontein, and they immediately were in the first team squad. So to be in the first team squad at Grey College is massive. And consider as well, these 2 guys are in grade 11, all right? So they were missing for the first couple of games. And then they decided they don't want to be at grade. They want to move back to East London. And they went back to Selborne. And as you can basically see, as soon as they went back, the results just went skyrocketed. Except for the game against Grey. 62-22 loss. I've spoken about that in the past. But hey, it's Grey College, guys. You know what I mean. So shit happens when you play them. Then number 9, we got St. Peter's College in New Zealand. 13 wins, 3 losses, average score of 30-17. These guys were absolute giant killers this year. I don't think there's anybody in New Zealand that expected this team to go as far as they did. And I think they finished 4th in the Auckland League. And then they basically had a playoff game against St. Kitts. And after, they beat them 22-21. And just a couple of weeks before that, they lost 36-15. Then they beat King's College by 1 point, Westlake by 2 points, and then in the semis, Hamilton by 1 point. And then, like I said earlier, Napier boys, they won 31-28 after trailing like 28-12 or 28-10 or something like that with, not much time left. So, look, I realize they're champions of New Zealand, but this was just an anomaly. I think anyone in New Zealand will agree that no one expected St. Peter's to win this year. So, huge result for them and definitely deserve their place in the top 10. But I think it was just a freak year, guys. I don't think they deserve a higher place, certainly not. And then we got HARTPURY College at number 8. 11 games played, 10 wins, 1 loss, average score of 35-11. Absolutely dominated their local league, won the championship. You can see that, most of the games they very, very comfortably won. I think the one exception was St. Paul's with 33-29, which was a close score. And then they came to South Africa and they beat AFFIES, and a very strong AFFIES team, 26-15. And then what happened? They met Grey College and they lost 60-0. Like I said, when you play Grey College, shit happens. So number 7, we got PAARL Gym. 15 wins, 2 losses, which is an average score of 45-21. And you can see their 2 losses. Unfortunate to lose the PAARL Derby, but anything can happen on a Derby day. To PAARL boys, 21-24. And then the 13-32 loss to ROOS, who, as I say, you guys have no idea how dominant these guys were at this stage of the season. They were absolutely decimating any school that came in their direction. So to move on to number 6, we got Hamilton Boys High. The 12 wins and just the 1 loss with an average score of 26-11. They play in the Super 8, I believe it's called, and they just dominated the Super 8. And then had a tight game against Napier Boys in the final game of the Super 8, 23-22. And as you can see, they dominated St. Paul's, New Plymouth, and Wesley College to reach the top 4, and then St. Peter's beat them. Nobody would have believed St. Peter's would have beaten them, but it happened. And then they went on to thump Christchurch Boys 43-25. I think anybody that saw that top 4 was absolutely convinced that Hamilton Boys was going to take the title. So huge upset by St. Peter's. And then number 5, we got Glenwood. 15 wins, 1 draw, unbeaten season, 0 losses, average score 44-12. So the 1 draw was against Grey College, 25-25. But, the rest of the season, I mean, they had some great results. Beating AFFIES, thrashing Monument, and dominating their local league. And also a great win against Otanikwa as well. Big pack of forwards at Otanikwa this year. There's a lot of argument in South Africa that they should be number 2 and PAARL should be number 3. But the fact is that Glenwood didn't play the same level of opposition as, PAARL did, for example. And also, you need to remember something about this Grey College team. They played 3 of their matches at home this year. So if you take a look at the quality of opposition they played, and you take a look at how many games they played on the road, I mean, it was just amazing that they could have the season they did, basically. And another thing to consider is that they played their traditional rivals, grade PE, in Port Elizabeth, which is like 10 hours travel, whatever. And then they went back, and then they went to Durban to go play Glenwood the next week. So there's a lot of traveling. I think on any given day, this is a 10 to 15 point game in Grey College's favour. But I just think they were fatigued, and I don't want to take anything away from Glenwood. They had an amazing team this year, but I would have liked to have seen them play more quality opposition. And then number 4, we have St. Kitts from New Zealand. Just 1 loss, could have been a 100% season. I think right at the beginning of the season, everyone expected them to win the New Zealand title. And you can see their 1 loss was to St. Peter's in the final, 21-22. Now, if you take a look at it, just a couple of weeks before that, they'd beaten them 36-15, so it was a massive shock. But take nothing away from the St. Kitts team. I mean, it was definitely the best team in New Zealand this year, regardless of the knockout structure and all the rest of it. So I definitely think they deserve their place there. And I think if they got edged past St. Peter's in that key game, I think they would have comfortably have gone on to win the title by a very comfortable margin. Now, I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing this properly, but number 3, I've got SEDBERGH School in England. 13 games, 13 wins, 0 losses, unbeaten season. Average score 47-8. And you can just see absolute dominance over there. And Warwick School, like I said, they were the Daily Mail champions. They beat them 26-10. And basically dominated their league. And they produced 5 England schools players this year. According to this season, the 2017-2018 season. So there are 5 England schools players there. So extremely strong team. And I just edged them past St. Kitts just a little bit purely because of being an unbeaten team. If St. Kitts were unbeaten, they would have definitely have been in 3rd place and SEDBERGH in 4th place. So on to the top 2. 2nd place, I got PAARL. 13 wins, 1 loss, average score 48-13. And just take a look at that, guys. I mean, they've beaten some strong schools, and they've beaten some strong schools very, very convincingly. If you take a look at it overall, I mean, they lost to Grey 26-28, but you don't see many close games there. you don't see many games where the opposition even had a sniff over there. I think the closest game, if I look at this, was 32-13 against PAARL Gym, and PAARL Gym had a strong year. I mean, they only lost a couple of games. And also must be remembered that this Porous team, when they lost to Grey, number one, they were playing away from home. Number two, they were missing, I think it was 4 SA Schools players. Now, the counter argument to that is going to be, well, Grey was missing 3 SA Schools players. The difference is in the combinations. So, Porous were missing a prop and a hooker, and their fly half and their inside centre. So, to lose that combination, 2/3 of your front row, where all your domination is built up, as well as your 10 to 12 channel, I mean, that's a big loss. Now, Grey, for instance, lost a prop, a flank, and a centre. So I think it hurt Porous a lot more than it hurt Grey College, and I think I don't want to predict that game if they're both at full strength, because although those Porous players are special, De Wet Marais and Wycliffe Latour, and I forget what the prop, I think it's Achenbach from Grey, I mean, they're probably like the best in the country in their positions. So I wouldn't want to predict it. But look, at the end of the day, Grey College won, Porous lost, and that's the result stands. So I think it's pretty obvious who my number one ranked team in the world is. Grey College. Like I said, they had the one draw and 11 wins, 48-18 average score. And just take a look at those results, guys. I mean, think about the teams that are in the top 20. You got Christchurch Boys, they beat them 66-28. You got HARTPURY, I'll put in the top 20, 60 points to 0. PAARL Boys, 34-20. SELBORNE, 62-22. AFFIES, 39-28. GLENWOOD was a 25-25 draw, and they beat Porous 28-26. Now, you want to talk about derbies? Their annual derbies against Grey High School. That was 63 points to 8. Now, when this team was on fire, it was on fire. And I would have loved to have seen a mid-season clash between Grey and Porous. I think that would have been a game for the ages. So let's just take a look at the breakdown. So we've got 9 South African schools, 6 schools from New Zealand, 3 from England, 1 from Fiji, and 1 from Ireland. Like I said, guys, if anyone can provide me with a link where I can see clearly Australian schools results, and I can see clearly more Irish and Welsh schools results, and maybe some French school results, I'll be happy to take that into consideration. What I did do is I researched Scots College, I think it is, and Brisbane Boys, which are the 2 top schools in Australia. Their results just didn't impress me. There was nothing that stood out there significantly that made me think to myself, yeah, this school definitely belongs, on a top 20. I don't think there is a school from Australia that could tour New Zealand, England, or South Africa and beat a top 5 school. I think that's impossible. Maybe England. I think England's top 3 are pretty strong, but outside of that, not too sure. But I know in South Africa and New Zealand, our top 5 would put 20-30 points on the board against any Australian school, and I'm happy to take bets on that. So get your cash out if you want to argue. Anyway, thanks for watching. In the comments below, let me know what you think. What would your top 20 be? Let's start a friendly debate about this. Try and make it friendly, and yeah. So look forward to your results, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the rest of that. And yeah, I'll be carrying on with the South Africa New Zealand series in the next video. And as I always say, guys, please carry on with the comments. I'm learning a hell of a lot. For example, one of the guys said that North Harbour wasn't absorbed into the Blues to start with. It was actually absorbed into the Chiefs. That's why Glenn Osborne and Ian Jones were there. So you see, that's something I don't know. That's something I learned. So, yeah, please give me as much information as possible. Have a great one, guys.